Hello? Hello? Welcome to Friday. Happy last, or second to last, Aries Decan 3 day. Day before we head into Taurus season. The sign of my moon. Really excited for this little chat here. I've been looking forward to it. I had many things that I wanted to say and to discuss. I'll try to be brief about it, but I'm not good at that, as it turns out, Gemini rising. I took a bunch of notes, so I'll just try to go through it. Let's do that. I will reiterate my disclaimer, as I have been through all of these, that these talks have been, for me, a diagnostic tool. I'm not trying to teach a system. I'm currently in the process of anchoring methods of astrology into my understanding that I hope to be able to share with others and utilize to help others in the future. But now I'm speaking freely and seeing how 20 years of connective ideas are coming together in a free-flowing way. I will always try to cite sources, but sometimes I don't even know where they are anymore. So if I remember one later, I'll bring it back up at another time. This is an adventure of ideas. That is, like I talked about imaginative historiography in the last video, adventure of ideas is foundational to what I'm trying to do as well. And that is cribbed from Alfred North Whitehead, who has the philosophy that is dearest to my heart, which essentially, among many, many other things, expresses the notion of movement through linear time that is also holonic expressions of ideas as people. I have a song called Word Alive that I hope to share with you someday, but right now it's a monstrosity of like 33 tracks. It needs serious mixing, but there's a line in it. I'll sing it for you. Characters aren't just letters, they're people too. Letters aren't just people, they're number 2. Also them all 3, to let the light one in, to let the light open, to let some light in, one let them live. Ideas are people. People. Planets are people. People. This phone is a people. People. So, keep that in mind. It's an adventure. All right. So, we are in Aries Decan 3, which is the tarot card of the 4 of Wands. It is maybe my favorite of this sign because it is a decan that is presided over by Venus. And I love Venus. It is Friday. It is Venus's day. At sunrise today, was greeted by pinks and peaches in the sky, and I sang a song to Venus, and I listened to Ernest Holt's planetary song to Venus. Ernest Holtz? I'll have to source that one. Amazing, amazing composer. Great orchestral piece that goes through all of the 7 visible planets. Anyway, so this is a decan that is presided over by Venus in the sign of Aries, which is presided over by Mars. So we have the marriage of Mars and Venus. And the more that I feel into decans or decans, the more that I am trying to see what makes the most sense for me in terms of how the energies are stacked, what moves through what, And I'm trying to avoid higher and lower language. So what I'm trying to think of is an aperture, is a tightening focus to a loosening focus. The widest focus being the fixed stars, the beings that are furthest away from us, that never move in our sky. They're always beaming the same energy in the same place directly toward us. And then the signs, the constellations and the signs move just like our sun does, all around the ecliptic. The Decans, as far as I'm feeling into it now, move also with the signs through the houses, which are fixed. The houses are 12 divisions of our planet that don't ever move. So signs move through houses, planets move through houses, and perhaps Decans also move through houses. That one, still testing that one out. So in terms of widest focus, we have fixed stars, and then next we have Decans. Here's an image for you. It's not literal, so don't get hung up here, but if we have the planet spinning 23.5 degree tilt on an axis, and it's going like this, you have a pole this way, you have a pole this way. We're pointed in the north, we're pointed toward Polaris, which is our pole star. Toward the south, we don't have a set star that we're pointed directly toward, but we still have these poles that we're spinning around. Imagine the Decans as, in the north, 36 little sections of pie that meet at the pole star, or the pole point in the south. 36 of them like that in the north, 36 in the south, making 72. So then I like to think of the pole beings, the pole stars, and say this is a void point, say this is a star point, and they are pulsing energies and spinning energies into the planet. They pick up energies from the Decans, those energies move down through to the signs, and those energies move through planets as they move through signs, and then they hit the Earth, they move through the human, and they get recirculated back again, recirculation back to Houth Castle and environs. There you go, there's your image. So if Venus is ruling or in charge of the third decan of Aries, the Four of Wands, that means that Venus energy is moving through Aries and is even moving through Mars, if we assume that Mars is in the sign, the third decan as well. So it moves through. So that is Venus energy that is coursing through Mars's veins and inspiring him to action. And then let's remove the gender here because we're zoomed way out. Venus energy is inspiring Mars to action. Okay. All right. Now, I'm also exploring the idea that as we move through a 30 degrees of a sign, that there are certain constellations that are going to be part of the energy fusing through the decan. So we looked at a lot of the ones that are showing up in this section of sky, if you want, over the last 30 days. And we looked at a lot of the stories of Andromeda, Cassiopeia. We looked at Cetus. We looked down to the southern hemisphere and we started to look at Argo Navis, or the pieces, the remnants of Argo Navis. We looked at the horizon. We looked at Triangulum. Okay. We didn't talk about Cepheus. Cepheus is a really, really big one, and I think that Cepheus might pertain to this particular decan. Cepheus is a good king. Cepheus is a king of Ethiopia. Cepheus made a sacrifice that broke his heart, and he did everything he could to avoid making this sacrifice. In one telling, it's having to do with the hubris of his wife, proclaiming herself to be the most beautiful in the land, and her daughter, their daughter, to be the most beautiful in the land, and it was punished by Poseidon. But in another story, it didn't really have to do with that. It has to do with Cetus, the she monster, terrifying the village, terrifying all the people that he was the king over, and wreaking havoc all over. And he made the very, very difficult sacrifice after trying everything he could not to sacrifice his daughter to the she monster. Then we have Perseus, who comes in with the head of Medusa and freezes the Cetus, the sea monster, and saves the day so Andromeda doesn't get eaten as she's chained to a rock. Let's take a non-moral view, if we can, of what this myth might be suggesting, and look back at Cetus. First, I thought maybe there's a gentler notion of what Cetus is doing for us and through us in this story. And we talked about how there's a star that is in one vantage point, the heart of the whale, but if you flip it and you look at it from another angle, the constellation is showing that it's the tail of the whale, which is the rudder. And the rudder is the ascendant of the birth chart, or the helm, if you're translating directly from the Greek. So we have all of this navigation imagery. What is Cetus doing for us? Or what is Cetus doing with us? If you look at some of the old constellation maps, you will see that Cetus is a she monster with the kind of body of a whale, and then paws, like a sphinx almost, which is very interesting. And you'll notice that her paws are stopping the waters of the river. Now, there are many people that have started to play with the idea that the geography of Egypt is representing, via the pyramids, the chakra system. So, let's bring us on back to the pole star, which is Polaris. Okay, so Polaris, we know this type of star to be a Cepheid variable. What a Cepheid variable is, well, it's actually 3 stars, but the main star, the biggest one in Polaris, is a Cepheid variable, meaning that at a constant and steady rate, it expands and contracts and gets hotter and colder. I don't remember which direction is hotter, which direction is colder. However, it's called a Cepheid variable because the first one of these was discovered by astronomers in the constellation Cepheus. So, why is it an important astronomical discovery? We've found that through the steady pulsation of these types of stars, we can use them to navigate and measure distance. Now, I also like to imagine Polaris as a pulsing heart, pulsing down toward us. If you look up and you do a time lapse of the sky, you can see all the stars spinning around Polaris, and Polaris stays the same. So I like to imagine this as a pulsing heart, and these stars spin, 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 and they spin these energies into the human. And then also Gaia, our Earth, has a heart as well, right in her center, and she pulses and pulses and pulses, and that spins out. This toroidal shape of the planet, because of the electromagnetic field, there's a toroidal shape of the human body because of our electromagnetic field. Spinning in and through and up and out. Okay, so Polaris, perhaps Polaris is the point of the top of our chakra system, and we straighten our spines toward Polaris. I think of whirling dervishes in the Sufi tradition as well. and their beautiful skirts as they spin around in devotion. Okay? So Polaris is our spine, stretches our spine. And what does it stretch out? It stretches out our chakra system. Okay. Then when you look at Cetus stopping up the point in our chakra system that is right before our crown, right up here, right before our crown. So what do we do when we freeze the she monster, the dark feminine? And what is the dark feminine again? The dark feminine is the repressed feminine, the sometimes destructive feminine, the feminine that creates from chaos, perhaps. So what do we do when we freeze this force that might be representing the dark feminine? Maybe the she monster was gobbling up the women under Cepheus's rule and possessing them, and they were manifesting outwardly in a terrifying way that's representative of the dark feminine, and we needed to tame this, so we sacrificed the daughter. Something along those lines. Or what happens when we remove those paws? Then there's something about the flow of the river is allowed to go all the way to the top, all the way to the crown. Okay, so another interesting thing there is that Polaris is the very tip of the tail of Ursa Minor, who is, in the Greek stories, a baby bear. There's Ursa Major, Big Dipper, Little Dipper, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. Story of Callisto is related to this, but also, if you take a look at the constellation right over near it, you have Draco, which is the dragon. Now what happens when you look at Draco and you flip the way we normally look at them, like we did with Cetus, tail and heart, flip? What if we do a flip-de-doo like this, and then we realize that what you actually have as Polaris is the tip of the wing of the dragon. It's a winged dragon. It's meant to fly. We clipped the wings of the dragon when we turned them into a baby bear. And also it's interesting anyway, because that bear has a long tail, and there's really not any bears that have long tails. That's another story. What are we hiding here? Well, it immediately makes me think of the shamanic practice of shadow work. What is shadow work? There is a dark dragon coiled at the base of your spine that is meant to be liberated up through the human. However, it stays coiled and tight, and it is a repository for all of our fear and rage and typically societally negative or uncouth energies that are held, repressed, and stuck in the human. That sounds a lot like Kundalini in one way. I don't think it's the same thing, but it sounds a lot like what the Kundalini thing is. Gurdjieff had a story about something, it's a very mysterious story, in Beelzebub's Tales to his Grandson, talks about the organ Kundabuffer. Kundabuffer, Kundalini. Okay, so what is the organ Kundabuffer? Well, many people who have translated or worked with Gurdjieff's ideas claim that it's literally Kundalini energy. I think that's kind of missing the point. I think that the Kundabuffer, in the story, it's the idea is that implanted in the human is an organ, the organ Kundabuffer, that is a stoppage point that is implanted in the base of the spine, I think, in the story. And what it does is it stops the human, or it makes it so that the human can live in fantasy. They can pretend like they're not a finite being, and they can sleepwalk through life. Interesting. That sounds like the pause on the river stopping the dragon from rising up. And there's two snakes or dragons in the Kundalini idea that rise up and then hit the crown chakra of the human. This is like energy. This is an energetic system that has a stoppage point. And what happens when we stop it at this? I can't remember the name of it, but in India there's actually names for these stoppage points, these blockages, knots. And when you hit that last knot right before the crown chakra with Kundalini energy, it bounces back. It's reflected like a mirror back into the human, and it allows you to think in an illusory way. It allows you to be immersed in the illusion. Makes you crazy. People who are obsessed with Kundalini awakenings and do all kinds of Kundalini exercises, or are spontaneously Kundalini awakened, often they're pretty messed up. They don't have any way of separating reality from their vision. It takes a conscious tuning of each of the chakra points to allow that energy to flow in the way that it has always, perhaps, or at one time, flowed properly. The energetic system of the human body. Imaginative energetic system connecting us to the all in a way. All right, enough about that one. So, take the pause off, allow it to reach the chakra, liberate the negative feelings, liberate the rage, allow for the destructive force to come through. Do not brace in fear against it. We're starting to get at some Venus working through Mars themes here. When we talked about, I'll go really quickly to Triangulum. We looked at Triangulum. It's associated to Sicily, which is Ceres' place of home, and then that is also related to our dying and rebirthing goddess Persephone. Persephone spends time in the underworld, then time in the overworld. She is representing, when she's in the overworld, she's representing the birth of spring. When she's in the underworld, however, it's the same thing. She pushes the flowers up from the underworld. So this is perhaps a northern or eastern and western, or northern and southern hemisphere way of apprehending the same story. That's an example of fractal thinking. It's both and. Okay. So in Triangulum, there is a galaxy that we have titled Messier 33. We talked about 33 being the age of Jesus when he supposedly was crucified. Okay, Messier 33 is connected to Andromeda galaxy. Why do we think that? There is a stream, like the stream that Cetus is putting his paws, her paws over, a stream, plasma stream that we notice is connecting Messier 33 with Andromeda. Perhaps they were at one time from the same place. That's interesting. I will use this to articulate an idea that I have. I think that the science of our future, right now there's a divide between science and religion, and science and mysticism, and even science and creativity, even though they already always do work together hand in hand. Einstein had I think he had the story about like a sleeping chair, and he would in his dream states is when he would get his ideas. Watson, the discovery of DNA was done with hallucinogens, all kinds of, they're intimately connected, right? However, currently there's a divide between them. They pretend to be at different things, and what do we use in the science world to hold them as separate? Is that science dies on the cross of repeatability of the scientific method. It has to be provable via repeatability. However, in the future, I believe that science is going to reach further and further, astronomy specifically, reach further and further out into the cosmos, make some discoveries that are going to be validations of the findings of quantum mechanics that are going to validate, I think quite literally going to validate, the practice of astrology. We're going to have real math and real science that is going to be able to explain how astrology works. Now, that also means that I think that I am sort of an ambassador. I'm holding the stories and I'm looking into the science. I think they both are meant to be working together. Now, it's really complicated the way to think about like what is going on here, because I've been engaging in practice with the people that I'm studying with, where we look at the astronomy and we look at the spiritual dimension of the practice. But all of these scientific discoveries, like for example the naming of moons or the discovery of outer bodies and the naming them after different mythologies or whatever, we're finding that there's not really a logical way that these things can be explaining one another, and yet these findings enrich the myth. They enrich the myth. They add dimension to the myth. Was the myth apprehending something that we didn't quite know how to capture scientifically? Perhaps there's something that's more like the workings of quantum mechanics, where the observer is changing the reality of the experience. That's real trippy. But it makes a lot of sense. For example, just a small example, Mars. Mars has 2 moons. Mars, we are assuming, based on the composition, based on the way it looks on its surface, that there is water, or there was water on Mars at one point, and that there may have been life sustaining. There was an atmosphere, or might still have an atmosphere. Regardless, there are 2 moons. One moves around it really fast. One moves around it once a day. And these 2 moons are named Phobos and Deimos. Those are the names of Mars's 2 suns. So the 2 moons are named after 2 of Mars's suns, which is already really interesting, especially given what we were talking about with the reversal of moon and sun, god and goddesses, okay? Phobos and Deimos. Phobos is fear and panic. Deimos is dread. What good would those 2 things be circling around, reflecting the sun back to Mars, the god of war? What good would those 2 energies be constantly reflecting back? It seems pretty straightforward to me. They would help a self-aware being from thinking twice before engaging in practices of war or of ending the beingness of another without complete necessity. Dread, the pit in your stomach, that's something that empathic beings have. That's how morality is born in communities, is the empathic function. It's gut response. Okay? Morality, by the way, is relative, but empathy is a reflective experience that literally stops you from doing something that you can imagine would be negative or detrimental to you. Okay. Phobos, Deimos. Now Mars had some other children as well. I did a meditation where I was with Mars, asking Mars about why do I perceive that Mars is hiding something from us in a kind of a mischiefy sort of way. Mars said, well, you just can't see 2 of my daughters, who are also moons, or 2 of my female moons. So you see Phobos and Deimos because that's where your consciousness is. However, I also have a daughter named Harmony, and I have a sister named Eris. Harmony, Eris, discord, chaos, harmony. You just can't see them because you don't know how to work with these energies yet. As soon as you know how to work with these energies, you're gonna see those moons. Okay, that was pretty interesting little thought. So, another interesting thing about Phobos, the moon, is that it is moving real fast and it's tightening because of the gravitational force of Mars. It is tight. We think, first of all, these two moons came from the asteroid belt. But Phobos is getting closer and closer and closer and closer, and it is called the doomed moon because we believe through our measurements that at some point it is going to smash into the surface of Mars and break into a million pieces and turn it into a belt, just like a lot of these other planets further beyond Mars have around them. That makes me just wonder about the observer and about the consciousness of the observer and about the projective power and influence of the observer. It makes me wonder, is that really what's going to happen? Or is that our fear and panic projected onto that being? Does human consciousness influence the cataclysms that happen in a cyclical fashion on this planet? I don't know. What's another analog type of word for cataclysm? Apocalypse? Well, take the Greek of apocalypse. What does apocalypse mean? To uncover. All is revealed in an apocalypse. Or, in a cataclysm, a comet is buried into the earth and it uncovers the bones from millions and billions of years before. Both those mean to uncover. In a time of apocalypse, all it's free energy, it is free information. All the information, nothing is held behind a tower, nothing is cloistered behind anything. Every being has access to all the information. You just have to grab it, harmonize it. Okay, I will quote or reference Rick Levine here, one of my favorite astrologers ever. He is the original astrologer to find very amazing poetic and scientific ways to express quantum mechanics through astrology. I just want to shout him out and send you his way if you find any of this interesting. He speaks to me in a great way, a beautiful way. He teaches his students that the planets are BFPs, big fucking particles. But he also equates particle wave duality with the way that we can apprehend the planets, okay? And relates that to the concept of fate and free will. When we freeze a birth chart and we look at a bunch of frozen objects, we turn them into particles, and that's describing fate. When we see energies that move around, a wave, that's free will. The degree to which we perceive takes us in one direction or the other. That's a mind-blowing idea. Rick Levine. Okay, now let's do honor to the Orphics. I want to shout out another person who's been inspiring me so much lately. Her name is Kristen Mathis. She is a scholar of esotericism for 35 years or so, and she is currently translating the Orphic hymns. And I adore her translations, and I adore her point of view. She may very well be uncovering things that people have not seen since Pico was looking at the Orphic hymns and trying to discuss the ways in which they're similar to the Kabbalah. She is positing that the foundations of the Orphic hymns served as the inspiration for all of the operations that came out of astrology in the Hellenistic times. We date the written down Orphic hymns to after a lot of these astrological practices, but she thinks that the actual hymns themselves might have come before it and are the reasons why we know how to, in a chart, figure out the lot of daemon and all of these different practices that were enumerated over hundreds of years. Now, she has created an expression that I just like gasped with delight when she used it, and that is fractal animism. She believes that the Orphic hymns are expressing a worldview that is that of fractal animism. And she's another person that makes the point that fractal animism means that everything is a being. Everything is a being, all are beings, and all are, there's no hierarchy involved in this as well. We're looking at different vantage points. Initiates going through the Orphic tradition had a perfectly logical system that took them through all of these people until they found the truth of the opposite and found the truth, the one being expressed in its seeming opposite, but also just from a different vantage. It's amazing. Mysterium Mundi is her Substack, where she is actively translating the hymns. Highly recommend, if this is of any interest to you, to check these out. I would like to put song to these hymns. Her translations are beautiful. I hope to do that sometime soon. She got me thinking about trying to take my vision out as far as it could possibly go and see these beings from their widest vantage. It's thought that the Orphics believed that Venus, or felt that Venus is, Aphrodite, is one of the primal foundational energies. And the more I thought about the way that they were discussing Venus, the more that I realized that Venus, or thought that Venus is actually light expressed as gravity. It's all attraction. She is the Great Attractor. In my last talk, I talked about the Great Attractor, which is a giant cosmic anomaly, perhaps a black hole, that's bringing thousands upon thousands of galaxies toward it. The Great Attractor. When we think about, if we just take it to that level of attraction, gravity, and it's just, like all different ways that you can feel under the influence of that force that change drastically what it is that you're experiencing. Love sick, amuse, inspiring song, so much. A face that launches 1,000 ships. Okay. So if Venus is the Great Attractor, there's also another cosmic anomaly that's literally directly across from the Great Attractor in terms of our charting system, which is called the dipole repeller. The Orphics believe that the counterforce to Venus, which with the two of them working together, is what holds everything in place. If you only have Venus, you only have attraction, you get collapse. If you only have the other, which they call necessity, then you only get outward expansion and loss of energy. The two working together hold all of our bodies in place in space. That's cool. So then I was going through my days, and on Tuesday I was having a chat with Mars, as I told you, and I was asking Mars. I wanted to get outside of war and aggression, and I was like, distill this down for me, help me understand. And the first thing that came to my mind is will, which is not an atypical read on what Mars is doing, will. But then Mars, perhaps with the aid of Venus, or perhaps with the aid of Mercury, was saying, now I want you to imagine a camera. Imagine a camera and imagine aperture. What is happening when you tighten the focus on the camera, and what is happening when you loosen the focus on the camera? Well, you are, for one thing, you're letting more light in or less light in. And then I thought of, immediately saw the images of those 2000s, early 2000s movies, like the Bourne movies, where they started doing this really crazy, chaotic camera work thing, where they tight focus on the camera work. It changed choreography for fights forever. They do a tight focus, and it's a kinetic handheld energy, and it's tight and focused, and you get a sense of anxiety out of it. It's just like constant anxiety, constant jitters that comes out of it. Moving, tight focused. Then you have the widest focus, and you watch something, a very large thing, might walk through the frame, and the very large thing looks very small, and it might be running through the frame, it might be zipping through the frame. However, because we're so far out, it just seems like it's going gently, gently, gently. It's a completely different feeling when we tighten the focus and when we open the focus. And yet what is happening? Light is being expressed as movement and energy. Light as energy. Venus, light as gravity or attraction. Mars, light as energy. Now we can go micro, macro with that, and it goes crazy. Then all you have to do is relate. How does it make you feel when you do this action? When you go forward with this action, how are you feeling in this moment? And that's going to give you a little bit of a clue as to your orientation within the action. It is literally just liberated energy, though. Okay. That gets us to the topic of reaction versus response ability, or reactor versus actor. Instinct versus will. Now, can light be stored as a battery? Yes. Yes, it can. Chlorophyll is the perfect capture of light to be stored, to be used as energy later. It's a battery. Human bodies have a way of taking that captured light and then liberating it as energy. What is that? Mitochondria. Mitochondria. What is the mitochondria DNA? Mitochondrial DNA is passed down from your mother. Venus moving through Aries. You know, they also have measured the moment of conception. The egg, at the moment of conception, gives off light at an order of magnitude that is many times more than the sun at the exact moment of conception. What is that about? That's real. You can look that up. That's Mars. That is Mars. Light expressed as energy. When the fetus is being formed at certain points, what makes it from a non-gendered being into one expression and the other, or something in between? Well, it's all about how the energy is moved. What is perhaps the biggest terror of our age? Well, through man-made chemicals, how we are stopping the function of mitochondrial DNA, and we are making the process of holding light as energy, and or moving and liberating light as energy, more and more difficult for ourselves. And we have everything from Alzheimer's to inflammatory conditions to allergies. All of these things are because we are dimming the light and not able to utilize it properly. Okay. Great. I'm like halfway through. Okay. I'm not even going to go into this, but if you're interested, you should look at an astrologer that's looking at the United States astrology, because the United States is going through some really fascinating astrology, and it has to do with a Chiron return, Pluto, a lot of different planets that are related to these topics. We're essentially having an identity crisis right now, or a crisis of growth, energy. How will our energy be used in the future? Will our energy be used in the future? Will we be in the future? Seem to be up in the air at the moment, literally. When we stop being able to utilize energy, light as energy properly, or move light as energy properly, we get anxiety, dread. When you eat really low energy foods or tortured foods, causes a child to have a tantrum, causes me to have a tantrum. All right, I want to end with the man of the hour. I want to use a real life figure, one of the, if not the best example that I think exists of Venus through Mars energy in human form, and a historical figure. Polarizing figure, so brace yourselves. I want to talk about Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar is what is some historians call the very first emperor. He is the figure that was instrumental in moving the Republic to the Empire in terms of Rome. Now, I'm not going to get too far into the history because I will get in the weeds so fast and I will be checked by so many people happy to learn, but I'm not going to try to do that. I want to use him as an example. Now, this is also knowing that he's a very polarizing figure. Most people think of him as the dictator. Most people tend to think of him as a genocidal murderer. Most people tend to think that the patricians that murdered him did so for good cause, for good reason. I wonder if we might be able to look at this from a different angle. And that brings me back to this idea of historiography. One of the key tenets of historiography, which I talked about in my last video, historiography is the way in which we create history, the way in which we gather the information to piece it together to make a story. His story tends to be, as we've all heard, written by the conquerors. So we're hearing Julius Caesar's story through the perspective of the patricians. Think about that. Now, imaginative historiography, what I want to do is that I want to have loosen my ego enough to understand that my personal history, from the way that I organize my day, the clock, to the way that I organize every facet of my life, was created by someone. So my personal history is not mine. Imaginative historiography is a way to reclaim personal history. The collective of humanity, it is time that we reclaim our personal history and tell our own stories. Decolonize our personal histories. All right, so one thing is dictator. Originally, it was an office, and the difference between a dictator and a populist was that a populist didn't believe in the institutions at all, were skeptical of institutions, and the dictator tried to use the institutions or work with the institutions. In both cases, for a long time, both of those types of figures were looking to rebalance the scales of power toward the people. That's fascinating. Okay. Now, a important thing about looking at history and looking at figures is that it's not fair to remove context. You cannot judge historical figures. You can't look at historical figures from your own vantage. Have we come very far since the time of Julius Caesar? Absolutely, of course. To compare those two things, certainly useful. However, you cannot judge that figure by our own standards. You have to judge them or you have to explore them by the standards of the environment in which they came up. So, try to give you some of those things. Julius Caesar was the first successful populist. There were quite a few before him, all of whom were murdered immediately before they were able to effect change. Caesar was able to stay in his position of power for 20 years, affecting change that was tipping the scales of power 20 years before he was murdered. That's very impressive, given the track record of everyone who came before him. You might not even know Julius Caesar as a populist. There's some great wordplay in Shakespeare. Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. After they realize that he's killed, the people gather in the street, they mob in the streets, and they're surrounding, and they're screaming out, his will, we'll hear it read. His will, we'll hear it read. Little wordplay there with will and will. And also with will of Caesar. What was the will of Caesar able to accomplish? Well, his will had in it a certain amount of money that was to be given to every citizen. It also had to do with land redistribution. Seems like a small thing, but it's really not. One thing that he did was, in his will, he included that Caesar's garden would be given back to the people as a public space. Okay, so why are we talking about Caesar otherwise here? Julius Caesar. Well, back before his time, many people who were in power liked to claim royal lineage. They claimed the royal lineage from Mars, who was the father of Romulus and Remus. So most everybody who was in tyrannical power over people before Julius Caesar came along claimed descendancy from Mars. Well, Julius Caesar also claimed parentage from the marriage of Mars and Venus. Very interestingly. However, his family line fell into hard times. They lost a lot of their money, so he basically lived with the poor people before he rose to power. He was a poor person before he rose to power. He was a very unique person in that he had royal parentage and yet royal lineage, but then also was poor. So he was in among the people. He knew what the people wanted, and his aim, it can be argued, was always to bring more balance to the people. Now, we know of him as a great military commander, or a terrifying or terrible military commander, however you want to look at it. But one thing that's very clear from Caesar's point of view is that his goal was to be in charge of everything so that he could achieve the aims that he was looking for. So his entire military career, think about all that this person did in their military career. That was a means to an end, which was to control the Senate. That's crazy. That's crazy. Can you imagine the determination and the amount of time that something would take, and the amount of foresight something like that would take, the amount of willpower something like that would take to achieve those ends through those means? He was a unprecedented communicator. He knew how to talk to multiple different classes of people, famously. One story is that when he was out on his various campaigns, he would make a tent, and then he would have people that he was dictating to, and he would dictate 4 and 5 different reports at the exact same time, just going from person to person, different parts of the report, and he would do so specifically with language for the person he was addressing. Nobody else did that. Nobody else did that. When he was speaking to patricians, he was addressing them and speaking their language. When he was speaking to the people, he was, with the plebs, he was speaking their language. And he did it all at the same time. Brilliant communicator, understood the psychology of a very vast, wide range of people. Another story that's famous, that could be false, but is very evocative of this idea, is that at a certain point when he was in military commander, there was a mutiny that happened, and he is alleged to have completely collapsed the mutiny with the force of one word. Who knows what word that was? I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows. It's a pretty evocative idea, though. What else did I want to say about him? Okay, in the military, here was something that was of his time. So when a leader was off to war or was campaigning in a certain way, and they were opposed by another, if they conquered the other, if they beat the other in the battle, it was expected that they would kill them, 100%, always. Julius Caesar's default was forgiveness. The default was forgiveness. He almost always exercised forgiveness first. That's interesting, because that in itself it has an inherent power thing in it. So if you battle someone that's opposing you and you conquer them and you beat them, it's expected that you will kill them. That could be called force. What Julius Caesar did with forgiveness, that might be power versus force right there. Because in one fell swoop, not only did he exercise clemency, but also just in the act of forgiving, it was assumed that he had the power to forgive. Just in that act. That's very evocative. That's worth some thought right there. I was tripping on this some years back. I had a great friend and roommate who, at one point at a drunken night, did something. They were very, very overwrought or very distraught about it. They were asking for my forgiveness. And I was just on this. I was tripping on this so hard. And I refused to forgive them because I said, that assumes that I am over you, that I have some sort of authority to offer you forgiveness. I can't offer you forgiveness. All right. So anyway, Julius Caesar had the power to do so. All right, now another brutal, awful thing is that a common practice in the military world during those days was called decimation. They decimated their army or whatever. You know what decimation means? Okay, decimation is when you have the soldiers that you're commanding who are too scared or refuse to do the thing that you're commanding them to do. What you do is you round up 10 of them, you round up 10 of them, They all cast lots, and the person who loses, the other 9 are required to beat them to death. That's decimation. Well, Julius Caesar didn't do that sort of thing. He didn't force in that way. What he did when his soldiers were too scared to follow his commands, wearing all of the clothing that showed that he was the commander, he ripped off his helmet and he ran first into battle. He used the art of shame in his men to galvanize action out of them by putting himself courageously, putting himself forward. You know what all those men did? They rushed him and surrounded him and moved forward into that battle, and they overtook and they won. They protected him and they overtook and they won. And he he inspired their own choice of action. That's a fascinating one. Another way that he was a great leader, or a potentially inspiring or fascinating leader at least, was that he defied expectations always. There was something called a triumph. It was a very rare handful of people ever received triumph, which was a giant parade and your name in marble and all kinds of crazy things. Well, after one of his successful campaigns, he received the honor of either getting this triumph or running for the office that he wanted to run for. It was either or. Everyone knew the highest goal. It was a higher honor to do the triumph. He decided, he sent everybody home. He said, no triumph, I'm gonna run for this office. He ran for that office, he won the seat in the office. It moved him forward in his career, moved him out of the military world into closer to, if not in the Senate then at that point. And then he got his triumph later. Defied expectations. And that's also that's a patience. That takes willpower to exercise that form of patience and to be able to foresee how multiple players might react to your deliberate action. Always. Okay. Now, I'll stop. I'll stop with Caesar. Sorry, it's already 1:02. This is going to be my longest one. Okay. I did mention that I wanted to talk about psychopathy. Now, psychopathy is something that is, I guess, like astrology. I'm really happy that it's way more in the popular lexicon now. I'm very happy about that. It's good to spread awareness. However, it's one of those things where it's sort of reached the level of buzzword, and it's kind of a lot of the important work that's been done around it is sort of watered down, approaching a place of meaninglessness. I've studied psychopathy for 14 years now. It's a fascinating topic, it's a terrifying topic, but one of the most edifying things to research under the topic of psychopathy is political infiltration of psychopaths. There's a book that changed my world forever called Political Ponerology. Highly recommend it. It was written by a Polish psychiatrist who lived under psychopathic rule, and it demonstrates when one looks at the world today and thinks about topics like conspiracy or topics like the idea that there's like a vast network of power that is all coordinating in a way out to get you. That is a misapprehension of the mechanics, which are largely unconscious, of psychopathy. There are multiple different types of character disturbances. Under this, in political ponerology, the science has changed to some degree since this book. However, it's very useful, and I would have to go back and look at it again to really give you detail on it. But you have characteropath, who tends to be the leader, the charismatic leader. You have the schizoid type, which tends to be the manifesto writer. You have psychopath versus sociopath. to different types. In this definition, I believe it was the genetically born psychopath versus conditions creating sociopathy. I'm already getting more afield than I feel comfortable with. However, the point of it was that many self-serving actors can work together to achieve many different effects that I think mimic something like what we're just exploring in Julius Caesar's story, which was, from one perspective, the cultivation of will to level a playing field. Now, what are some of those things? Their actions can imitate the will of benevolent leadership with the following tactics. Glib superficiality. First of all, what is a psychopath? It's somebody who is has a lack of empathic function, very basically. So therefore, if you haven't spent any time putting yourself in the shoes of what it means to not have that gut thing that stops you from doing something that you know you wouldn't want to have done to yourself, you should do some thinking about it. So they have something that is called bespoke personality construction. So like Julius Caesar could, through his vast understanding of psychology, speaking to the person as if he, at the moment, turning, all at once, speaking to 4 or 5 different, massively different psychologies of humans. The psychopath version of that is bespoke personality. It is a rather soulless version of that, though. They have essentially a bunch of masks in their repertoire that they can employ, that they have seen over time produce certain effects in others. Okay? The other one is spellbinding. That one's very fascinating. It's a charismatic function. It's sort of like a snake spellbinding. It's a predatory tactic wherein people can be highly attracted to a spellbinding psychopath. Another one that is fascinating is the subversion of language. They can be adept at taking pre-existing language, draining it of its meaning, and subverting that meaning until it means something completely opposite in some cases. In 1984, my birth year, that book is the term newspeak. It's a great example of it. A great example from reality, my favorite one, extraordinary rendition. Extraordinary rendition. What is it? It's when, it's like a really great cover of your favorite orchestral piece. No, that's when there are laws against torture in your country, so you take the person you want to torture to another country where there aren't the same laws, and then you torture them there. Interesting. It's extraordinary rendition. Sounds nice. I often think about the difference between the words pray and pray, A and E. There are a lot of religious leaders that pray over their patrons. Biggest defense against a psychopath is awareness. Awareness. It's true. They know when they're seen. If you're finding that you're dealing with a lot of psychopath issues, if you're identifying a lot of issues like this in your life. Also, the last one of these is that they have the ability to create psychopathic behavior in crowds and in individuals over prolonged exposure. I think that that's enough to just show you that you could look at many different facets of most of the world's governments now and see that that's a reality that we're living in. You don't need more than 6% of a population, global population, to achieve the effects that we have seen our world over. So I want to leave with this. What can we be inspired by in the Julius Caesar story? I don't expect us to be able to use those tactics or those that same approach, those approaches toward Venus-led leadership. I don't think leadership is going to be individuals. It might go in waves in our coming future. However, I think we're going to be moving away from hierarchical forms if we're meant to survive at all, and moving more into circle, back to like many cultures have done before in the past. I feel romantic about elders at the center of a circle. However, Venus, heart-led leadership in our future. What will be the role of forgiveness? What will be the role of liberating rage? What will be the role of non-hierarchical power distribution? I'll say a tiny brief thing about anarchy. I think that anarchy is an idea whose proper function we haven't cultivated the willpower on a large enough scale to be able to sustain what I think is a very brilliant political structure. Anarchy. If you study any of the most brilliant thinkers that were discussing anarchy, you'll see great empathy at work in its potential. One topic that I love is temporary autonomous zones. Hakim Bey discussed temporary autonomous zones. That is pirate ships. It is areas where spontaneously there is a lawless condition that in our current state can't be held for long enough, so it's always temporary. However, is there the potential for permanent autonomous zones? Well, I think that will require us cultivating our battery through will development, and then liberating our will with intention. And what is that intention? For me, that's do unto others is simple enough for me. Do unto others as I would have them do unto me. It's better than that. I want the highest good. I want the highest good for all the beings. And we talked about at the beginning how I see that all are beings. It's the highest good for all involved. Okay. I'm going to leave you with one final idea about chaos and harmony. This is going to be very, very bastardizing information theory. Poetically, I'm attracted to information theory. We have studied large-scale systems like a waterfall. A waterfall is the perfect example of a large-scale system that is chaotic through and through. At every scale is chaotic. However, very complex, spontaneously emerging complex geometries can be found in vast chaotic systems like waterfalls. What's that about? Is it a will toward form? Is that a will toward beauty? Another attribute often given to Venus? Is it an attraction toward harmony? I don't know. I took a picture. We walked down to a waterfall in Cloudland Canyon this past weekend, and I took some photos and some slow-mo video, and I swear, look at one of these photos and I see the golden spiral in it. I don't know. Is it my imagination? Probably. But I've got a really, really, really fun imagination. All right, I'm gonna go. It's getting dark again on me. Love ya. See you next time.